Emily, welcome to Art and Cocktails. I am so excited to finally have you on the show. I've actually had a few suggestions from our listeners to have you on, and I can't believe we haven't connected sooner. Welcome.
I know. Thank you so much for having me. We just had a brief connection before we started recording because this is the first time we're meeting via Zoom. I hope to meet you in person soon. Thank you so much for having me. I've been watching your career over the last decade really evolve and blossom. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. And likewise, for our listeners, I would love to get started. If you could share a little bit about yourself and your business, and how did you get into this world of art? How did you fall in love with the process of connecting collectors to artists and all the other amazing things that you do right now?
I'll try to
I know
sum
it's
up.
the hardest question.
Yeah, I always knew that whatever I did when I grew up as a kid, it was gonna be in an art field. I didn't know what that was going to be, but I knew what inspired me and got me up in the morning, and that was art in all its forms. By the time I got to college, I took my first art history class, and my father is a big art lover, so I was frequenting museums and galleries and learning so much about art history as a child. By the time I got to college, it was the natural progression. I ended up getting a master's in art history. And like I'm sure so many of our listeners, I had many different jobs. The first 10 years of me being in the workforce, I always knew I wanted to work for myself. And I was fortunate enough to work as director of education at the Brant Foundation for 7 years. And that was my last job before I went out on my own. So it's been about 9 years now, maybe 8 or 9 years. I have an art advisory. I have an independent curatorial practice. And I also have a podcast called the Art Career Podcast, where, similar to you, I connect with art professionals about life and what has driven them and inspired them to get to where they are right now. And my podcast, different from yours, actually, it's not all fine artists. I kind of experiment in all the different creative fields. So it's my career is there's three different aspects to my career that are all equally as important to me. And luckily, like you, they do overlap and influence each other.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. And I can so relate to having to work for yourself and how it is better for everyone. I think there's certain people that are just not meant to be in a position that was pre-designed for them. And someone who's multi-passionate like you, even though I think there is a deeper sort of root cause or mission that you're after that helps connect all these pieces, the curation, the education, the podcast. And I love that so much. And what do you think that is for you? What's driving you to keep serving people in all these different ways?
Wow, that's a great question. I have just always had a deep hunger to be the best possible version of myself and to be as successful as I possibly can be for myself and for others. And then to be able to, I think, as women in business and power, it's important for us to take responsibility when we're given opportunities. I know for myself, it's always important for me to explain how much power and success mean to me, right? And to not be shy about saying that is such a driving force in my life. I was raised with a father on Wall Street, and the rest of my family are judges and lawyers. I have the mentality of ambition that was instilled from a very young age, but I've flipped the script a little bit. This is not in contrast to my family. This is just who I am. And this brings me to talking about emerging artists. I would like to use that motivation, use that power, use that success to uplift others and myself. And that's really important to me. And that's why, up until a few years ago, I had to wait until I could really start working with emerging artists the way I wanted to. And now I can. And I'm getting to the point in my career where I can actually help others too. And so that's just always been a huge driving force of mine. And I think it will be until my last days. I'm just a really ambitious and driven person, for better or worse.
I love that so much. And I think there's a weird rhetoric around ambition and stepping into your power and taking up space. But more than ever in this day and age, with all the craziness going on, I was just talking to Marina Press Granger for those listening a previous episode. We're talking about how artists can use their power and voice, but for some reason, I'm seeing more and more artists taking a back seat. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on artists and ambition. And should artists really fully allow themselves to own their dreams and own the space they want to take up in this world?
I think the only way an artist will feel the joy and power of success is if they do take up that space and they do take control of the wheel. That's easy for me to say because those things come naturally for me. I know it's not easy for a lot of artists, but I say this in every conversation I have, understand that they are at the center of the ecosystem and it's not the other way around. And until they step into that power, I think a lot of things need to change in our industry. And I think it's our responsibility and it's artists' responsibility to step into that power and not have anyone else dictate their careers but them. You're a perfect example of that. I've watched your career, right? You took hold of the wheel, you knew what you wanted to do, and you didn't wait for your seat. You made your seat on your own terms. Right. And I'm so happy you've gotten to where you've gotten because you are a perfect example of that. And that's not going to be for everyone in terms of how you want your career to look like, right? That's going to be so different for all of us, but you do have to take the wheel.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the compliment. And I think for me, I really just wasn't willing to bend myself backwards and shape myself into someone else's cookie cutter idea of what an artist is. And I think for me too, as an immigrant, there's a little bit more urgency. I didn't have anything to fall back on. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this. It feels weird. It feels awkward. But now it's like calling in all the other people with similar ideals and values. And you're right. I think there's so many different ways to get there. And the most important thing is to decide what it is that you want, whether it's a traditional art path or your own independent art business. I think there's just like a million different versions on the spectrum. So thank you so much for highlighting that. And I wanted to ask you, as someone who works with both high profile artists, I noticed you placed in Alice Neal with some collectors, as well as emerging talent. What are some characteristics of artists that collectors today may be looking for? Because I know that there's different desires and needs and values that people have, but across the board, what are some things that collectors are super drawn to?
I think that it's important to highlight the fact that when you can find twofold an artist that really speaks to a collector, whatever taste they have, and an artist that is also building their career, maybe not rapidly, but gradually. I see that we've both seen so many instances where the secondary market really rocks an artist. And so for me, whether it's, I used to say when I started advising, I never want to work with someone if they're looking at an art collection as an investment, right? I was very adamant about that. I am not adamant about that. What I'm adamant about now is that you have to have both, right? As long as you are approaching it from a place of education and love of the artist, and my collectors can't flip right away because they sign a contract that says they can't. So as long as you have best intentions in mind, I think, of course, listen, art is so expensive. Even emerging art, we're so jaded in this unregulated market. It's like for us to be like, oh, that piece of artwork is cheap at $2,500. That's a crazy thing for us. And so I think that any investment you make in art, whether it's a $500 piece, I don't think anyone should be, any artist that has been practicing for a certain amount of years should ever sell anything for under $1,000. That's going to get me in trouble.
Ooh,
Uh,
challenge accepted.
but like whether it's $1,000 you're spending or $3 million, it's an investment and that matters. And it matters that unlike a stock that you invest in, it's on your wall, right? You have to love it. It is going to influence, affect, and change your life. And so it's a great responsibility. So I didn't answer your question really, because that's in terms of what I do work with so many different types of collectors with such different taste. And I love that so much.
That is the answer then, because there is no formula. There is no like checkbox you need to mark off to attract someone because they might love what you do and not what the famous person next to them is doing.
And what I will say is exactly, you have to pay attention to, I think you and I do this in our careers every day. It's you have to ask yourself, what do I want? Not what I'm seeing on Instagram, not what the next person is doing, not the cool thing to do. What is going to fill me up, right? And whether that's choosing a piece of art or it's choosing your next career move, we have to get quiet enough, I think, to be able to answer those questions because I know that I've made decisions in life where I haven't been answering those questions and they're always wrong, right? They never turn out how we want them to turn out because we're not paying attention to our authentic selves. So as a collector, put whatever the hell you want on your wall, regardless of what it is. If it drives you, then that's your answer.
Yeah, it's so funny. I had another collector here on the podcast, Sonia Burrell, and she's an avid collector of very fun pop art. And she said the same thing. I don't care if it's someone with a crazy art career or someone who just started this year, it's something personal that speaks. And I want to ask you, I want to flip the question a little bit for the artists listening. I think it's important. A lot of artists are also collectors, so it's so
Sure.
relevant and connected. But I wanted to ask, let's say an artist is serious about their career. They really want to stand out and be taken like a professional. They want to raise their prices to over 1,000, like your wonderful challenge just suggested. I want to know what are some mindset shifts that an artist needs to make to really just take ownership and say, okay, I'm treating myself as a professional right now. Do you have any thoughts? Have you seen someone step up from, oh, behind the scenes, I'm just a little artist to like, I'm taking myself seriously, I'm putting myself out there and I'm taking up space?
Yes, and I've seen that multiple I'm lucky enough to have seen that a handful of times with artists I've worked with, and I think it every time I come back to this question, for some reason, it still sounds woo to me, but it's the only truth I know. The only way these things are going to manifest is if you work on the belief that you deserve whatever that is and you can step into whatever that is and you can own whatever that is, right? This goes for anyone, I think. And so for an artist, this is a perfect example. I was working with an artist who was totally emerging. She was a known artist, but hadn't been picked up by a gallery yet, hadn't had a solo exhibition in any gallery that she'd wanted. And we were working together and we were having a conversation. She's a friend of mine too. She was like, I'm really interested in this gallery. And they've said to me, they love my work. So I hope that one day maybe they'll include my work in a group show. And I was like, hold on. Let me get this straight. They told you they love your work. The gallery owner has, I was like, so what you're going to do is put a brief little curatorial statement together because you have a collection of works that work beautifully together and you're going to pitch a solo show. The worst thing that's going to happen is this gallerist is going to say, no. Are you willing to deal with rejection? She was like, yes. I'm like, good, because that's side note. If you're not willing to deal with rejection, don't do this. I'm sure you can say the same thing. I get rejected all the time.
Not personal.
Yeah, it's not. And she pitched this exhibition, and I attended her opening solo exhibition a year later. So sometimes it's just, I don't know. I think imposter syndrome is real, but I think it's a crappy word for it. It's like you have to just take these opportunities that are like, who am I to say that? Or who am I to ask for that? And just do it, right? Like you don't have to wait until you're fully, I don't know, engulfed in the flames of like motivation and truth and passion around it. She put something together and I told her just keep it simple. I think that a solo show of mine based on these works would work really beautifully in your gallery.
Such a small shift too. It's going from one day in the distant future to I can see this clearly. And like you
Yes.
said, I deserve this because everyone does. Anyone who start like, for example, when you started your podcast, you didn't wait for someone to maybe you did, but I'm assuming that like me, you're just like, okay, I have something to say. I'm just gonna create a package around it and just start showing up and sharing. And then all the opportunities start coming into that container that we create. Same thing with art. I love that so much. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I didn't know anything about podcasting when I
Me
started.
neither.
I still don't.
Me neither. And it's so
Like,
funny because there was side note, for anyone listening about podcasting, I would hear these crazy things like, "You need $5,000 a month for production," and I was, like,
you don't.
recording my episodes out in the field, and it's
Yes.
proof you don't especially this day and age, our technology is so advanced, we don't need anything.
No, we don't. And I think people more and more, especially the younger generations, that like perfectly edited anything in life isn't what's even in right now. So it's be scrappy. This is the time to be scrappy.
Exactly, I see a lot of the younger kids posting very unedited photos, like, even just of places, and I'm like, "What?" But they love it, and it's the antithesis, like the AI and overly polished stuff that we are so bombarded with, so I love that.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm gonna change gears a little bit, and it's related to both collecting and art careers, but I wanted to hear your thoughts on networking because you have attracted some amazing guests both on your podcast and the collectors that you work with and the artists, of course, that you represent. I would love to hear your thoughts on how do you approach building relationships because networking is all about just making that connection and nurturing it. Would love to hear any words of wisdom for someone looking to build their network.
Yeah, I think that for better or worse, networking, mentorship, connection is the most important part of life and career, and especially in the art world, it's really important. I'm sure you can attest to this. It's not for artists, it's not cold calls, it's not random people, it's not someone discovering their work that's usually getting them noticed by other people. It's the other artists that they have networked with, that they know, that respect them, that they have relationships with, that are getting them opportunities.
1000%.
Yeah, I think we say this, and for some reason, not everyone is grasping this. It is more important to build a network of people where you respect their work than it is even to try to get to know someone who's above you on the creative ladder that could help you out. Cause that feels like opportunistic. Whereas, like, building friendships and networking, especially as artists. Like artists want to hang out with other artists. I'm not an artist, I'm a creative, and 95% of the people in my life that I've chosen are creatives as well. So that is really good advice. Aside from that, for me, I've stayed in touch with not every single person, but every single person that has impacted my life in a positive way. I've stayed in touch with, and it's really important. People love that too. People love when I know that I'm helping a younger creative out as a mentor, as a friend. That's so fulfilling to me. So I think networking is everything, and it doesn't have to feel opportunistic. It's really just building connections with fellow artists and people. If you look at the art historical canon, it's not a coincidence that groups of artists, that friendship circles got famous at the same time
True.
because one of them was saying this to the gallerist and this to the critic and pulling the other one in. So yeah,
I so agree. And thank you for sharing that because one of my first few shows, like I remember I attended a workshop and I met a few artists there. And one of them had an opportunity at the Trenton Art Museum. And that was like, it's a small museum, but it was a huge deal at the time. And it came from a fellow artist. It didn't come from a curator inviting me, sending me some fancy letter in the mail. It was just word of mouth. It was literally a Facebook message. It said, "Hey, would you be interested in this?" And that's a lot of what happens. And thank you for highlighting and normalizing that, and that's why we all gotta stick together.
exactly.
I love that. I would love to hear a little bit also about how you navigate approaching high profile guests. I recently saw you have a collaboration with Art 21, which is like one of my favorite things that I was introduced to in college, like Art 21.
I know,
And
I know.
and this one is more for people who are leaders in the arts or maybe entrepreneurs like us. What are some ways that you've been able to attract these people that are big deals in our industry, which is impressive.
Honestly, I have very little fear of rejection. And I really, some of the people that I haven't had prior relationships with, it is just me contacting them on my own and being really authentic.
I love that.
That's it. That's really all it is. I remember the beginning of the podcast. I wanted to start the podcast. I was like, "All right, I'd like to launch with a very well known artist." And I had met Marilyn Minter a couple times through my ex partner. And so I knew her. She didn't, I certainly was not someone in her circle at all, but I had her contact. And dear Marilyn, I don't know if you remember me. This is who I am, starting a podcast. It would be such a huge favor, but I would really love to launch with a conversation with you. She was like, "Yeah, here's my assistant. Let's book it." And from that point on, it was because with podcasting too, it's fun. You're reaching out to people to promote them as well. So it's, but yeah, I don't know. I just reach out to the people that I want to connect with. And if they're high profile, I say to myself, if they're meant to be in my orbit, they'll respond. And if it's not for right now, that's okay too.
Mm.
So that's
Yeah,
it. It's really just me introducing myself to people because I don't come from an art background. I don't come from an art family. I'm not a trust fund baby. There's no secret where I'm getting to know these people at, it's just me introducing myself and being
same.
authentic.
Same here, and it works. You don't get all the people you reach out to, but you get a percentage of them, and that's more than
Yep,
enough to build something. So thank you so much for
exactly.
that. Such a great reminder. I would love to hear a few more questions for you if you're okay on time. Would love to hear about the process of working with an art advisory where you connect the collectors to their desired, pieces or specific artists they want. What is that like, and how does one go about finding one? Obviously, I'm going to include a link to your services, but just in general, like, how does this process work?
I think there are so many art advisors out there, both good and bad, just like in any other industry. For me, it's really important whether you work with me or you work with someone else that they're actually educated in the history of art and also understand the current art market, right? Those two things are really important.
I'm gonna
It,
ask you real quick, sorry, before you go on.
no, no.
Are there resources that you could recommend? Let's say someone's listening and they're like, I want to get into this, but I don't know. Are there resources you would recommend to read or to watch for someone who's okay, I'm interested, but I need to educate myself?
To be an art advisor.
No, to work with you as a collector.
Oh, to
Like,
work with me as a
mhm.
collector.
Or an artist even. Like, what are your favorite resources for staying in touch with the art market trends and market reports and art history or just in general?
No, I know this is a great question. All the things on a daily basis. I start my day reading the Times every morning. I'm always staying up to date with art news, ArtNet, Financial Times. You have to certainly stay up to date with all of that. And in terms of like collectors working with me, for the most part, my art advisory has been word of mouth. So it's people needing an art advisor and then talking to someone and say, I have someone that I trust that has done a really good job for me. And it's like any relationship, I'll meet them before we even do anything. I want to get to know them. I want to understand what inspires them, what moves them, what's most important to them in life too. I can honestly say I don't have any collectors that I don't like as people.
It's good.
They're all just like really wonderful humans that care about the artists they're collecting, whether they're alive or have passed. And we start a journey together, and the journey is really educational. That's why I prefaced by saying it's so important to work with an advisor that is educated in art history and educated in the current market. So I have a master's in art history and I did the Christie's Art Business Certification Program because I realized even after my master's, I was like, okay, I know all of this about the history of art. I know nothing about the business aspect of art, the current market. And as you know, that's something once you understand because we're in that's another thing. You have to work, if you're really seriously considering collecting, you really do need to work with someone who's on the inside that knows what they're doing. Like, hopefully you won't be taken advantage of, but we're talking about an unregulated market. And whenever you're talking about something that's unregulated, it's going to be a shit show regardless, right? So it really helps to have someone be able to navigate you through that and find all I do all day is look at art. So that's not what everyone does all day long. So I really can find my collectors exactly what they're looking for. And sometimes that takes a long time. And sometimes something strikes them right away. And then we go on a journey together whether it's a studio visit in Bushwick or a private viewing room at Zwerner, right? We approach it wherever the collector wants to start. And it's a journey. It's a journey.
That's wonderful to hear. Thank you for sharing that. And I think yeah, once again, going back to the relationship and really listening. And I would love to know too, for artists listening, what's the difference or what would be the benefits of working with an art advisor rather than just letting your gallery handle it? Is this something that is more rare to have an art advisor reach out to an artist? How do you think this industry right now is?
Yeah. I always go, if an artist is working closely with a gal, and this is a tricky question because I think things are shifting a lot in terms of gallery ownership over an artist like that. a- And there are a few examples where I'm like, no matter what, I would go to the gallery first. So that exists, right? But for the most part, I think it's based on relationships. And I think that as an artist,
Okay.
unless you've signed anything with anyone saying you can't, if you can sell work and build relationships on your own out of your studio, you should 100% do that. And if the gallerist you're working with is getting in the way of you building those relationships, as long as you're being transparent, then that's not the person you want to work with
Mhm.
anyway, right? It should be the artist should come first no matter what, because without the thing that the artist is creating, we don't have jobs, right? The
Thank
bottom
you for voicing that. And it's heartbreaking. I said it's funny. It's not funny. It's very sad. I was speaking with a few artists, especially after the 2023, 2024, when the art market took a little bit of a dump. A lot of the galleries were, in a way, not blatantly, but preventing the artists from pursuing other opportunities because they were saying, blah, 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 we built this reputation together, but the artists were struggling both financially and in terms of opportunities, but things weren't moving. And I've heard this many times from very established, very successful artists who are like miles ahead of me in their career. And it broke my heart because I never fell for that. I always like that immigrant mentality. I'm like, I gotta just survive. I don't care if I
Yep,
don't look cool. I gotta survive.
yep,
And I'm really happy that you mentioned this because I even read Peter Doig left his galleries and was just doing his own projects and still working with them, but in very independent, separate project
sure,
ways. And it really encouraged me. So thank you so much for once again putting the power back in the artist. And I was even having a conversation with my galleries about this. What is the role of the gallery? There's still a really important place for people who
for
are
sure.
curators and facilitate these things, but it's not this.
Quite frankly, unless your gallery is like flying you all over the world, paying for you to stay in hotels in different cities and like getting you unbelievable opportunities, great. If someone's doing that for me, yeah, I'll pass everything through the and but unless that's happening,
I've never heard
so
of that.
so everyone, it's every man for himself type of thing. And of course, you have these wonderful gallerist relationships with artists where some of my closest friends are gallerists that genuinely are in this to push artists' careers forward. But like you, I've heard so many stories of these heartbreaking where the work would be moving. People are interested, but it's not moving because the gallery is getting in the way of that. And I hope all those galleries close. I hope they don't make it because it's really unfortunate for the artists, which goes back to the original point I made, which is these artists, whether they believe they have the power or not, you got to take hold of
Well,
it.
hopefully, this episode convinced people that they have some power. They have a lot of power, but even just a little belief can help move
Exactly.
things forward. Thank you so much for sharing that. I wanted to ask you about the project that you're working on, Navigating the Art World, a practical guide for artists. Can you tell us about that and what that is going to be like? Because I'm also like super passionate about giving all the tips to all the people.
I can talk about it. I'm really proud of this project. This is something that I started working on, I want to say 5, 6 years ago. And I started compiling just a Google Drive of information that I wanted to share with artists because I worked with artists one on one all the time. And a lot of what was saying, especially in the beginning of the relationship, was the same thing. Right. So I'm like, why isn't this all in one place? Yeah, this is because there are some core pieces of knowledge that all artists should just know, period. And I think a lot of institutions are beginning to work with artists on professional practices, but I don't think there's enough education out there actually logistically getting artists ready for the real world and what's out there, right? It's one thing you have a relationship as an artist with your studio and with your work. And then there's the relationship if you are interested in pushing your work forward, there's a whole world that you have to acclimate into to be able to sell your work and to be able to understand. So I started compiling all this information. I was invited out to Cross Foundation in Wyoming this past October to conceptualize a show that will open at the end of May out in Wyoming. Uh, I was there for 2 weeks, and once I was done with my preliminary ideas, I was like, "Why don't I take the rest of the time and finish this art guide I've been working on for how many years?" And I did, and I finished it out there, and this had been something I was sitting on for a while. I'm always very interested in different multiple streams of income, and I realized, though, recently that I would like the multiple streams of income for the most part to be coming from people who can afford to be
Mm.
providing multiple streams of income to those of us who are lucky enough to have those. And so for me, although I do still from time to time work one on one with artists, it started feeling a little uncomfortable. I don't wanna charge artists for things that they can't afford that they should have anyway. So, I created this guide. It's you can download it for free. It is pay what you want. So, if you can afford even a dollar counts, right? Because all of that goes into the podcasts and me making more resources to serve the art community. But it's a free guide. It's 44 pages long, so it's like a mini book. It is all of the logistical basic information from a list of all my favorite residencies to all the top grants to conversations that you have to have with galleries to something as simple as what are all the roles in the art world, right? Like you're in college, you're coming out of college. It's, yeah, what is an art advisor? What does the secondary market mean? What are all these things that everyone just assumes we all know? So, it's a lot of information. Again, it's free. We'll link it. And I'm really proud of it. And I hope that I can start traveling to talking about it and sharing it with colleges and universities because I think it's a really strong resource for people. It's unfortunate because sometimes when something is free, people don't value it as much as something that is very expensive. So, this is probably the only time I will say this, but this is a really damn good resource that could be quite expensive and I'm putting out there for free. So don't miss the opportunity to download it. If you don't like it, you can never look at it again, but I think it's going to be helpful.
Yes, thank you. That's so generous of you. I'll make sure to link it for the artist community. And I agree with you. And even though I do mentor artists, I do find that there's just such an untapped pool of people who love the arts and want to support the arts. And that's like the next phase for me as well. I spent 5 years coaching and doing things for the art community, but branching out more and also creating resources like the one you did where it's available and you don't have to keep repeating yourself and you just document and serve people as you're building your own business and continuing to move forward. Thank you so much, Emily. This has been such a pleasure. I'm so grateful. I feel like we need a part two, maybe part 10, eventually in real time cocktails as well. Tell our listeners, other than this amazing resource, what else do you have going on? How can people work with you? Where can they find you?
People can work with me as I'm not doing as many one-on-ones anymore, but I still do them from time to time. Check me out on my podcast, the Art Career Podcast. My advisory is McElwreath Art Advisory. I work from collectors who are just starting out to collectors who have very advanced collections. And you can download the free guide, Navigating the Art World. We will link that. I've been recently working on a lot of curatorial projects as well.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful we got to have a conversation. And thank you for being on the show and all the amazing work you're doing for the art community.
And right back at you. Thank you so much for having me.